Chapter 116. The scene was so familiar to Christine Daly. Her mother had been bullied by her father all these years, and she always stood at the door and watched coldly. It was like watching a show, and she never wanted to help her mother. She never expected that karma happened to her before she had any preparation. Christine Daly wanted to cry out loud, but she also wanted to laugh out loud. It was so ridiculous. She wanted to laugh at her ignorance, her uselessness. And why didn't she help her mother back then? If she did something to help her mother at that time, maybe there might not even be today. At this moment, she finally felt the pain that her mother experienced in those years. There was someone in front of her who could help her, but she didn't give any response when she shouted out loud. Before the incident about Kevin Kyle, Christine Daly thought that her father still loved her. He might not love her with all he has, but at least they are family. Her father often beat her mother up, but he never said anything harsh to Christine Daly. Every time he greeted her with a smile. She thought that she was at a different place than Karen Daly and her mother in her father's heart. At this moment, she found out sadly that she might not be as good as Karen Daly in her father's eyes. Why could Karen Daly deserve a good life? Why could she get love from an excellent man like Kevin Kyle? Why was God always biased towards Karen Daly? Why can she escape the fate of being used by her father? Why was Karen Daly able to do it, but Christine Daly can't? She was filled with hatred. Samuel Daly stood by the door and watched Charlie beat Christine Daly with a poker face. It seemed like the person who was being beaten was not his daughter at all, but a stranger who had nothing to do with him. There was no emotion in his eyes at all. He only had money and power in his eyes. The word family had never existed before. After watching her suffer, he turned and left. Looking at his back, Christine Daly's heart fell into pieces. It was so painful that she just wanted to die. While thinking, Charlie slapped her again. He glared at her fiercely, like he wanted to destroy her, as if the Gook family's unfortunate fate was all her fault. Charlie, it's useless for you to vent your anger on a woman. Are you a man? Being controlled by Charlie, Christine Daly couldn't move, so she could only trigger him with words. Am I a man or not? I have slept with you so many times. Don't you know whether I am a man or not? Charlie said unpleasant words, lowered his head and bit Christine Daly's neck. You want me to make you suffer? Charlie, let go of me. Christine Daly cried out hysterically. What did she do wrong? Why did she deserve to be beaten by the two men closest to her? Let go of you? If I let go of you, how can I make you feel good? Charlie said while removing his belt. I will pity you again and let you have a good taste of man. Charlie, do you love Karen Daly? Christine Daly did not know why she mentioned Karen Daly at this moment. Maybe she really wanted to know from the bottom of her heart, so she asked. Hearing Karen Daly's name, Charlie stopped abruptly. Did he love Karen Daly? The answer was very certain. Of course, he loved her. He wanted to cherish Karen Daly so badly, hoping to see her brilliant smile for the rest of his life. However, he lost the chance to love her when he took the wrong step. Christine Daly placed her hands over her painful abdomen, continued to ask, if it was Karen Daly who failed to seduce Kevin Kyle, will you still treat her like this? No. If Karen Daly was by his side all the time, and they will continue to love each other, how would he be willing to give Karen Daly to another man? If he was reluctant to give her to another man, how could he beat Karen Daly? Why? Christine Daly doesn't understand why Charlie can't acknowledge her all the time, but he only had Karen Daly in his mind, a woman he couldn't have. Why? Charlie repeated. He thought about this question for a long time and finally came up with the answer. Perhaps there was only one reason that a girl who has self-respect and self-love naturally be respected and loved by others. Therefore, every time he forced Karen Daly to do something, he was very worried about Karen Daly, because he could never imagine what kind of things she would do. He said, because she loves herself. Does she love herself? Christine Daly could not understand who would not love themselves. She also loved herself, but why could Charlie treat her so differently? If you couldn't understand this, how can you compare yourself with her? Charlie let go of her, tidied his clothes, and looked down on her. Christine Daly laid on the bed, crying, thinking about what Charlie said. She was processing his words. Besides not loving her, Charlie looked down on her. In Charlie's eyes, Christine Daly was just a bitch, because she served him without any price. She should have figured these things out earlier, but when she thought about it now, it was too late. She didn't know whether she should continue to live or not. Don't pretend to be dead. Go and freshen up. Follow me to see the two bosses later. If you serve them well, I will give you some benefits. Christine Daly was lost in thought when Charlie's cold and heartless voice came into her ears. She suddenly opened her eyes and bit her lip. Charlie, you can't force me to do those things. I won't force you. Someone else will. Leaving these words, Charlie sneered again, turned around, and left. Christine Daly was very clear about the way the Gook family and her father do things, and she had seen many unsightly scenes with her own eyes. She did not expect that they would use these dirty tricks on her. Leo Kyle despised her, so she is useless now. However, they also felt like it was a waste of resources if they just let her go, so they planned to send her out to please the others. They thought to just suck everything out of her. Chapter 117. It was already late when Kevin Kyle came back from the west side. Karen Daly wanted to eat in Steamboat badly, so she brought Kevin Kyle to a Steamboat restaurant where she used to go with Faye Reed. The location of the Steamboat restaurant was very remote, but the shop was surprisingly very busy. The owner of this restaurant was very friendly, and also the food tasted very good. No matter what kind of customers enter the restaurant, they will feel a sense of back home. If a customer visits the restaurant for more than 3 times, the boss will recognize the customer. When Karen Daly brought Kevin Kyle into the store, the lady boss came up and said with a smile, "Hi, Karen." Look, she was so kind. She greeted Karen Daly like they were friends for many years. The lady boss recognized her even when she did not visit the shop for 3 years. If this was not a homely feeling, then what is? Karen Daly smiled. "Nice to meet you, madam." The lady boss looked at Kevin Kyle. She smiled and said, "We haven't seen each other for such a long time. You have a boyfriend now?" "Not a boyfriend." Karen Daly turned and looked at Kevin Kyle and saw his face looked unhappy. She held his hand tightly and said, "He is my husband." What a perfect match. The lady boss led them to their seats while complimenting. "Take a look at the menu. Call me if you need anything." "Okay, thank you." Karen Daly took the menu from the lady boss and handed it to Kevin Kyle. "What do you like to eat?" Kevin Kyle said, "I'm fine with anything." Kevin Kyle was not used to eating outside food, nor to eat Steamboat. He had never changed his routine habits, but now he was willing to change for Karen Daly. Occasionally, he would accompany her to an ordinary restaurant. Sometimes he would accompany her to eat Steamboat. And sometimes he would accompany her for shopping, just like couples. In fact, it felt quite good. Karen Daly took back the menu and looked at him angrily. "Mr. Kyle, do you know that when girls order dishes, they hate to hear men say that they are fine with anything?" Kevin Kyle. His diet was always prepared by the professionals according to his likings. He had no experience in ordering dishes in restaurants at all. To be honest, he really didn't know how to order. As long as Karen ordered the dishes, he would be fine with it. "I won't bring you for Steamboat anymore." Karen Daly glared at him fiercely. She was pissed off at this man who didn't know romance at all. "I'm really fine with anything." Kevin Kyle shook his head helplessly. "Fine." Karen Daly rolled her eyes at him again. She felt that this man, Kevin Kyle, should be kept in a box. She can only appreciate him. She cannot bring him to the human world. Otherwise, she would be pissed by him. Karen Daly knew that Kevin Kyle doesn't like food with heavy taste, so she ordered more vegetarian dishes than meat. She mainly ordered for Kevin Kyle. Although she was complaining about him, actually, she still thought that he was perfect. Look, even the waiter who served the dishes kept staring at Kevin Kyle. She did not feel good. She always felt that she might not be able to bring him back if he left. Thinking of this, Karen Daly glared at Kevin Kyle, which made him confused. Kevin Kyle sighed silently. It seems that Assistant Gray was right. No reasons were needed for a woman to be angry. After the dishes in the Steamboat started boiling, Karen Daly put her favorite tripe and duck intestines into the pot, but Kevin Kyle had never tried them before. "Aren't you going to eat?" She was still angry with him, so she asked in a bad tone. "I want." Kevin Kyle reached out and took the bowl from Karen Daly and replaced it with his. "The spicy food is too spicy, it's not good for your body. Don't eat too much." He sat straight, with a cold expression, and advised with a serious tone. However, Karen Daly could still feel that he was concerned about her. Forget about it. She knew clearly about his personality. What was she going to argue with him about? Karen Daly put down her chopsticks, which were stained with pepper, took a new pair of chopsticks, and boiled some dishes for him in the soup pot, which was not spicy. "You must be hungry. You can eat first." "Okay." Kevin Kyle nodded, but did not eat. Instead, he elegantly picked up the dishes that Karen Daly liked and put them into the pot. When he found that it was cooked, he would pick them up and put them in a bowl near her to cool down for Karen Daly. Karen Daly liked to eat Steamboat since she was a child. When she ate Steamboat with her mother, most of the time, her mother would be cooking the dishes instead, and she was responsible for setup and cleaning. Her mother would always put a plate aside and cool the dishes first. Then, when she ate them, they would not be so hot. She thought that no one else would treat her like this except for her mother in her life. "Kevin Kyle, thank you. Thank you for staying by my side when I was sad and helpless. Thank you for bringing me sunshine when I didn't believe that there was warmth. It's warmed up my whole winter. Matthew, what a coincidence. I didn't expect to see you here." George Ken's voice suddenly interrupted Karen Daly's thoughts. She turned her head and saw George Ken standing by their table with a casual smile on his face. He said, "Mrs. Kyle, may I sit with you?" George Ken was Kevin Kyle's friend, but George Ken asked Karen Daly if he could share a table with them. Karen Daly didn't know what he was thinking. Thinking for a few moments, she was about to turn down his request, but she heard Kevin Kyle's polite voice. "I'm sorry, no." For the first time, Karen Daly saw Kevin Kyle was so polite even when he rejected people. She was really curious about how his family brought him up. How could he be so perfect? George Ken ignored him and sat down beside Karen Daly. He smiled and said, "I was asking you, Mrs. Kyle, not Mr. Kyle." "Mr. Ken, I listened to Mr. Kyle's decision," Karen Daly said. Mrs. Kyle, we had a pleasant conversation 2 days ago. Why are you ignoring me now? George Ken shook his head and showed a facial expression that displayed his heart. Kevin Kyle looked at him with a smile, but it made people feel creeped out. George Ken shrugged, got up and said, "Enjoy your meal." After saying that, he turned around and left. After a few steps, he turned back and said, "Mrs. Kyle, if you meet any problems that can't be solved, you are welcome to come to me at any time." "Thank you, Dr. Ken." Karen Daly smiled politely at him. "If I need your help, I will definitely come to you." Karen Daly didn't hate George Ken at all. She even felt that he was very kind to her for some reason, but he was too canny. He even knew what she was thinking, but she knew nothing about him. Making friends with such a person was too dangerous, so it was better for her to stay away from him. Kevin Kyle. Who is this Dr. Ken? Although Karen Daly did not want to have anything to do with George Ken, she was very curious about him. Chapter 118. After hearing Karen Daly's question, Kevin Kyle frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "He studied psychology. From now on, don't care about him." "Yes, Mr. Kyle." Karen Daly looked at him and smiled. She had already known this man's arrogance and his persistence in his opinion. But when facing him, she could accept it. At the same time, in the corner of the city, in the club, there were people who were drinking, dancing, and even more dirty transactions. Christine Daly did not know how she came to this place. She tried to recall the glass of water that the maid gave her. After drinking the glass of water, she couldn't remember anything. When she woke up, she was already lying here, and a fat man was pounding on her. She closed her eyes, bit her lips, and tried not to think about it. She acted like she was just dreaming. When she woke up from the dream, everything would be fine. However, she was very clear about what happened was real. It was her father and the man she loved who sent her here together against her will. Charlie said that he would not force her. As expected, he did not force her but used a despicable and shameless trick. She held her fists, clenched her teeth, and repeated the words in her heart again and again. Through teamwork, Rovio Western development projects were successful, which was a good start for Rovio's future development in the West. The news soon spread throughout the country, and various financial news outlets reported about it. In the past 2 days, Kevin Kyle was busy with all kinds of social activities that came one after another. He was so busy that he did not have time to accompany Karen Daly for dinner for these 2 nights. Kevin Kyle looked at Karen Daly, who was helping him with the tie. He saw her blinking eyelashes and her blushed face. He couldn't resist sneaking in a little kiss. "Karen Daly?" Kevin Kyle whispered her name. "Huh?" Karen Daly raised her head and smiled at him while blushing. "Mr. Kyle, I know work is very important, but you have to rest too." For the past 2 days, he went out very early and came back very late at night. He was as busy as a bee. He knew that she was worried that he worked too hard. "Okay." Kevin Kyle patted her head and said, "I'll come back early today. We'll go back to Chatterton Town together tomorrow." Karen Daly nodded. "I'll be waiting for you at the hotel." In the past 2 days, after Kevin Kyle went to work, Karen Daly was working on the design in the hotel. She hadn't touched the brush for 3 years, so her hands were not used to it. Fortunately, her basics were good, and fashion design was her interest, so she made rapid progress in just 2 days. She sent the design to Faye Reed. Faye Reed praised her for half an hour, saying that it was a waste of her talent to stop designing in these 3 years. Therefore, Karen Daly would rather believe anything else than to believe Faye Reed's words. Tomorrow, they were returning to Chatterton Town. Before leaving Beeford City, Karen Daly had to meet with someone first, and she had to finish on this matter before returning to Chatterton Town. After getting into the taxi, Karen Daly took a few detours and finally came to a small cafe. She looked up and saw a wooden sign hanging on the simple decorated door. The sign was written that the boss was not in a good state today and would take the day off. What a willful and cute reason. When Karen Daly was about to knock on the door, she heard a young male voice. "Since you're here, please come in." With the permission of the owner, Karen Daly pushed the door open and walked in. There was coffee on the bar, and the smell of coffee filled the whole room. Even Karen Daly, who had stopped drinking coffee for a long time, gave in to the aromatic taste after smelling the fragrant smell. "Mr. Willis, can you give me a cup of coffee?" The man who was sitting at the bar looked at her. His black eyes were dark and scary. After staring at Karen Daly for a long time, he said slowly, "I don't know if I should address you as Miss Daly, or should I call you Mrs. Kyle?" Karen Daly said. She came here to find him with her identity as Karen Daly. She did not want to cause any trouble to Kevin Kyle, so she came as Karen Daly. "Since you're Miss Daly, I'll treat you to a cup of coffee." The man took the cup he prepared a long time ago, poured 2 cups of coffee, and handed one over to Karen Daly. Karen Daly took a sip and nodded. "I haven't had such good coffee for a long time. Mr. Willis, I hope I can still have a chance to drink your coffee in the future." "As long as Miss Daly wants to drink, you are welcome to come at any time." Mr. Willis narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Karen Daly with a faint smile on his face. Karen Daly turned to avoid his sight, and she looked at a painting on the wall. In the painting, a woman was holding a little boy, which looked very warm. Mr. Willis saw what Karen was looking at and he smiled. It seemed that the reason why we can sit here and drink coffee together was that we are both nostalgic people. So? Karen Daly raised her eyebrows and chuckled. Do you agree to cooperate with me, Mr. Willis? I don't think there's a man who would refuse a beauty like Miss Daly. Mr. Willis raised his cup of coffee and toasted to Karen Daly's cup. Happy cooperation? Happy cooperation. Karen Daly smiled and took a USB from her bag. This is the gift I want to give to you for the first meeting. I've heard about something these 2 days. As long as you persuade her to help you, you'll get what you want soon. In fact, what I care the most is whether your private collection is also in this USB stick. Mr. Willis's eyes narrowed slightly, and an evil smile appeared on his lips after he teased. Only after you see it will you know that. If you are satisfied with it, please don't forget to call me and tell me. After saying this, she turned around and left, leaving Mr. Willis a beautiful and slim figure to admire. Looking at her figure, Mr. Willis reached out and made a grab gesture. Karen Daly, he gently called her name. What a beautiful name. What a beauty she was. But she didn't belong to him. But did she really not belong to him? There was still a long way to go to the future. Who knew what would happen? The alley was covered with thick snow, and every Karen Daly's step left a deep footprint. However, the footprints were quickly covered by more snow, removing traces of evidence. After walking out of the small alley, Karen Daly stood at the taxi stop, looked up at the sky, and took a deep breath. Mom, I will never let go of those who hurt you. Chapter 119. After leaving the cafe, Karen Daly suddenly felt a little flustered. The feeling was so strong that she was feeling very uneasy. She suddenly wanted to see Kevin Kyle very much, so she could immediately hold his hand. In the past 2 days, news about the development of the Rovio Western project had been well spread. Karen Daly knew that the reason why Kevin Kyle could work unhealthily and around the clock was all because of the project. Kevin Kyle was the new director of innovative tech, and he had to participate in other projects of Rovio Incorporation Inc. Their big boss in Rovio Incorporation really gave him so many jobs. Kevin Kyle was always so busy, and he always left early and returned late every day. They didn't spend much time together. Maybe that was the reason why she felt so uneasy. She checked the time on her phone. There was still 1 more hour till lunchtime. She'd better go and find Kevin Kyle at Rovio Incorporation Inc. for lunch before he forgot about his meal. After having this idea, Karen Daly did not waste any time. She immediately took the subway, used the 9th line, to get to Rovio Incorporation Inc. Half an hour later, Karen Daly was standing in front of the Rovio Incorporation Inc. building. This building used to be a landmark in the Beaufort City, and it was also a company that many talented people want to work in. Although there were rumors that the headquarters of the Rovio Incorporation Inc. was moving to Chatterton Town after some time, there were still many people coming and going in every day, and it was very busy. Because of the guard at the entrance of the building, since Karen Daly was not an employee of Rovio Incorporation Inc., she cannot even enter the gate. Although she was unwilling, she had no choice but to walk around the entrance of the building, hoping that her feeling of unease would subside. However, the feeling of unease in her heart did not disappear at all. Somehow, when she arrived at the Rovio Incorporation Inc. tower, she felt that someone was watching her, as if her moves were under surveillance. She couldn't help but looked around and saw all kinds of luxury cars on the road. Everyone was focusing on their own business. Who would care about her? Karen Daly shook her head, tried to get rid of the strange idea in her mind. After observing for a while, she found out it was almost 12 o'clock in the afternoon. She can call Kevin Kyle to ask him out for lunch. As soon as she took out her phone, the door of Rovio Tower automatically opened, and Kevin Kyle, who was wearing a silver-gray suit, strode out with a group of people surrounding him. While he was walking, he was also saying something. People around him were holding pens and taking note, and some of the people kept nodding. Everyone's expression was very serious. Seeing Kevin Kyle's handsome and serious face, Karen Daly suddenly sighed in relief. Wherever he goes, there were always so many people following him. What would happen to him? Sometimes Karen Daly thought, if Kevin Kyle's aura was so strong, how would the so-called decisive leader of Rovio Incorporation Inc., Leo Kyle, be like? Rovio Incorporation's boss's family name was also Kyle, and Kevin Kyle's family name was Kyle. Was he related to Rovio Incorporation's boss? While Karen Daly was thinking, Kevin Kyle led a group of people by his side. Out of instinct, Karen Daly quickly stood aside and greeted him respectfully. President Kyle. In. Kevin Kyle snorted coldly as a response. He did not stop for a second and continued to move forward. She greeted him, but he didn't even look at her. Was he really that busy? Kevin Kyle, who walked away for some distance, suddenly stopped and looked back at Karen Daly. Karen? Obviously, he did not expect Karen Daly to be here. He was a little surprised, but after a while, he regained his cool look. Judging from his expression and tone, Karen Daly understood that when she greeted him earlier, he really did not notice her existence, and really did not purposely ignore her words. Only after walking for some distance, he realized that he heard her voice. This man's reflex was really good. Kevin Kyle looked back at Karen Daly, and the people around him looked at Karen Daly too. Everyone's eyes were fixed on her. and Karen Daly instantly became the focus of everyone's attention, which made her a little uncomfortable. She looked at Kevin Kyle with embarrassment and smiled. I'm fine. You can deal with your work first. You can continue to implement the things that we had just talked about. I have something else to do. Kevin Kyle ordered and walked toward Karen Daly. Go and deal with your work first. Don't let them comment that you stopped working because of me. Seeing that Kevin Kyle was still busy, Karen Daly felt very sorry for disturbing him. I finished all my work. Kevin Kyle held her hand and said, let's go. Let's have lunch together. Her hand was held in Kevin Kyle's palm, which made her feel warm and comfortable. She raised her head and smiled at him. Will it really not delay your work? If your big boss knows that you are not working during working hours, will he deduct your salary? My work will never end. Kevin Kyle held her cold hand and asked in a low voice, It's so cold. Why didn't you wear thicker clothes when you came out? Women love to look nice. It's not pretty to wear thick clothes when going shopping. Karen Daly smiled at him playfully. In fact, she went to see Mr. Wireless with a very professional image. After the meeting, she didn't want to go back to the hotel and change. While Karen Daly was talking, Kevin Kyle took off his suit and put it on her. I'm not cold. He gave her the suit jacket, leaving him only with a white shirt inside, which would definitely cause him to be cold. Your hands were so cold, you still dared to say it's not cold. His tense tone made Karen Daly unable to reject him anymore. Karen Daly looked at him and smiled. Put on the suit and hold my hand, then I won't feel cold. Be obedient, he said. His tone was a little tense, and it sounded like he was very unhappy. She was very thin. She was almost 1.6 meters tall, but he can't feel any weight when holding her. His coat draped over her body, long and wide, making her look even smaller. Unconsciously, Kevin Kyle held her in his arms and wanted to pass his warmth to her. Karen Daly leaned against him and moved forward slowly, following his slow steps. At this moment, an idea appeared in her mind. Instead of lunch, both of them can just walk beside each other like this until the end of their lives. It was such a romantic idea. When Karen Daly was lost in thought, she looked up and saw a car rushing toward them out of control. Karen Daly had no time to think about what to do, but out of instinct, she pushed Kevin Kyle away, who was going to be hit by the car. However, when Kevin Kyle left, she was still on the spot. She felt a gust of wind whistling, and then a mountain-like shadow came towards her. She suddenly understood why she was feeling uneasy today. Bang! The car crashed into the wall at the side, making a loud noise, and there was a big dent. Karen Daly was thrown out. Chapter 120, Everything Happened Too Fast. When Kevin Kyle wanted to save Karen Daly, she was thrown to the bushes by the road. Kevin Kyle could not do anything but to watch Karen Daly's slim and weak body being thrown out and fell to the ground. He watched helplessly and couldn't make any sound. The collision seemed to have hit his heart. Listening to the bang, his heart was broken into pieces. Karen Daly laid on the green lawn, blood gushing out from the wounds on her legs and pooled on the green lawn. The peony next to her was bright red, but she looked like a withering leaf. Kevin Kyle's heart sank. He clenched his fist and ran quickly to Karen Daly. He picked her up and held her gently in his arms. Karen Daly, don't be afraid. I am taking you to the hospital in a minute. Karen Daly heard Kevin Kyle's voice and twitched the corner of her mouth. It was not sure whether it was because of the pain or because she wanted to pull out a smile to make Kevin Kyle feel at ease. She looked at Kevin Kyle, and there was a hint of relief in her eyes. She suddenly raised her hand and put her cold finger between Kevin Kyle's eyebrows. She gently rubbed it and said, Don't worry, I'm fine. It just hurts a little. It's okay. How could she be fine? The wound on her leg was so horrible and a lot of blood was gushing out. How could it be all right? It was painful. Very painful. Every time she twisted her face because of pain, it felt like a nail pierced through Kevin Kyle's heart. For the first time, he hated this woman in front of him, and he hated himself for not being able to protect her. Kevin Kyle clenched his teeth and his eyebrows tightly. He sighed. He picked up Karen Daly and said to Amelia Gray and Nick Black with a tense voice, Go to the hospital. Karen Daly's leg had lost too much blood, and she was in shock. No matter how strong she was, she could not hold on any longer, and fainted in Kevin Kyle's warm arms. Before losing consciousness, she vaguely saw Kevin Kyle's scary face. It was the first time she had seen this scary look on his face. When Karen Daly woke up, she was on the hospital bed, with a thick white dressing around her legs and drip were on her arms. She turned her head and looked at Kevin Kyle's gloomy eyes. He looked at her with a gloomy look and did not say anything. He looked very angry. Kevin Kyle, Karen Daly wanted to say something, but her throat was so dry that she could not speak. Kevin Kyle immediately took the glass of water on the bedside table and put a straw in it and gave it to her. After taking a few deep sips, she looked at Kevin Kyle and forced a smile. Kevin Kyle. Before she could finish, Kevin Kyle turned around and left. He sat on the sofa beside her, looked at a document, and did not intend to give any attention to her at all. Kevin? She was lying on the bed, but he still ignored her. Karen Daly felt so bad that her eyes were tearing up. Seeing her tearing up, Kevin Kyle threw the document in his hand, walked towards the bed, and sat down. He bowed his head and kissed her pale lips. He bit and sucked her lips as if he was punishing her. Thinking back to the moment when the car hit her, seeing the bright red blood float out of her body, seeing her lose consciousness in his arms. When he thought of this, his heart panicked. In his 28 years of life, he had never experienced anything like that. He felt himself suffocating, which was worse than being really hurt. He was very angry that he couldn't protect her. He could only watch her get hurt in front of him. When the car rushed towards Karen Daly, she chose to push him away. Didn't she know that she would be hit by the car? Didn't she know that women act more vulnerable when it was necessary? Didn't Karen Daly know that he didn't need her protection? He only wants to protect her for the rest of his life? After some time, he let go of her lips and stared at her pale face. He reached out and gently caressed her. Karen, don't you cherish your life at all? Karen Daly punched him softly. Who said I don't cherish my own life? It's just that there was no time for me to think at that moment. If there were more time for me to think about it, I would certainly not do that. Kevin Kyle stared at her beautiful face, lifted the hair off her forehead, and kissed her forehead. Karen Daly, you are not alone anymore. If you get hurt, I will be worried about you. Karen Daly sniffed her nose and said in her nasal tone, I'm sorry for letting you worry about me again. If you promise me, you will not do such silly things again in the future. His face and voice softened. Yeah. Karen Daly nodded heavily. I won't do it again. Kevin Kyle stroked her head, shook his head, and sighed helplessly. Why were you so silly? Karen Daly thought in her heart, she was not silly. She did not want to see him getting hurt. If he was injured, she would be very sad. Kevin. Karen Daly stopped and asked, have you figured out why the truck went out of control? After Karen Daly asked this question, Kevin Kyle's eyes turned serious, but he tried to change the topic. It seemed that the brakes were jammed. It seemed that the brakes were jammed? Based on Karen Daly's knowledge of Kevin Kyle, he would never say the word like. Oh. Knowing that he would not tell her the real reason, Karen Daly did not ask any more. From Kevin Kyle's answer, the car accident must be a conspiracy. In the public, who would dare to hire a killer? Was the person behind this attempted murder targeting her, or Kevin Kyle? Karen Daly's heart skipped a beat when she thought about this, and looked towards Kevin Kyle. Kevin Kyle saw her worrying face, so he patted her head and said softly, the doctor asked you to rest more. Okay. Karen Daly nodded. When Karen Daly woke up again, she wanted to go to the bathroom. Her left leg was injured, and she could not walk, and only Kevin Kyle was in the ward. She didn't want to trouble Kevin Kyle, which made Karen Daly feel stuck. She closed her eyes and held her urges in for some time. She couldn't bear it anymore. When she opened her eyes, she looked at Kevin Kyle, who was sitting on the sofa beside her and reading some documents. Kevin Kyle looked up. If you need anything, let me know. Karen Daly smiled awkwardly. Can you go out for a while and get the nurse to come over? Kevin Kyle got up and walked towards her. He pulled away from the blanket and picked up Karen Daly. Karen Daly was scared and instinctively held onto his neck. What are you doing? She was very close to him. She could even feel Kevin Kyle's hot breath blowing on her face, and she quickly loosened her hand around his neck. As soon as Karen Daly let go, she kicked her leg and accidentally pulled her wound, which made her frown in pain. Kevin Kyle frowned and looked at her. Don't you want to go to the bathroom?